The memorial lights glinted off the sleek carbon fiber surfaces of the orbital platform as mourners gathered beneath the vast, transparent dome. Through it, the red giant Arcturus pulsed like an angry wound against the blackness of space. Dr. Alara Knox stood alone at the edge of the assembled crowd, her dark hair pulled tightly back, accentuating the sharp angles of her face and the hollow circles beneath her eyes. 3 standard months had passed since her partner's death, and each day felt like another small death of its own. He would have hated this, she murmured to no one in particular, watching the Arcturan dignitaries shuffle about in their ceremonial vestments, their elongated bodies nearly 2 meters tall, skin the color of burnished copper. Julian always said Arcturan memorial services were just political theater with better lighting. The corner of her mouth twitched upward at the memory before settling back into its now familiar grim line. Julian Reeves had been the diplomatic liaison between the human frontier colony and the Arcturan Sector Council. His death during what should have been a routine diplomatic mission had been classified as unfortunate atmospheric exposure, a bureaucratic euphemism that explained nothing and comforted no one. Alara's credentials as a xenopsychologist had granted her access to this ceremony, but not to the investigation files. She'd spent weeks petitioning the council for information, only to be met with official condolences and sealed records. "You're not exactly blending in," came a low voice from behind her. Alara turned to find a man leaning against one of the observation deck's support columns. He was tall, with the lean, wiry build of someone who'd spent significant time in varying gravity environments. His face bore the shadow of stubble that suggested either a cultivated look or several days without access to proper amenities. "Kieran Vale," he said, offering a hand. "I run cargo through this sector. Your partner hired me a few times for discretionary transport." Alara regarded his hand coolly before taking it. "Smuggler, you mean?" "I prefer logistics specialist for items of regulatory ambiguity," he replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Julian knew the value of operating in gray areas when bureaucracy fails, which it usually does. Before Alara could respond, the lights dimmed further, and High Judge Maros Vec, senior member of the Arcturan Council, glided to the center of the memorial platform, his 8-fingered hands splayed in the traditional gesture of cosmic respect, the elongated digits catching the starlight. When he spoke, his voice resonated with the distinctive harmonic undertones of his species. "We gather in the presence of eternal starlight to honor Julian Reeves, whose service to interspecies harmony will be recorded in the Great Archive." The High Judge's expression remained impassive, his large, faceted eyes revealing nothing as he continued the formal address. Alara felt her jaw tighten. Julian had mentioned Vec in his communications, always with a mixture of professional respect and personal wariness. "The judge plays the long game," he'd told her once, "and I'm never quite sure which game it is." As the ceremony continued, Alara noticed Kieran scanning the assembly with the practiced gaze of someone cataloging threats and exits. Following his line of sight, she spotted several Arcturan security officers positioned strategically around the chamber's perimeter. Their attention focused less on the proceedings and more on the scattered human attendees. "Is security always this tight at memorials?" she whispered. "No," Kieran replied quietly. "Something's off. There." His words cut short as a ripple of gasps swept through the chamber. Above the memorial platform, where a simple holographic representation of Julian should have appeared, a fully rendered, translucent blue figure flickered into existence. An AI ghost, a prohibited technology that mapped consciousness patterns before death. Julian's ghost, unmistakably him down to the characteristic tilt of his head when troubled. "Council records are falsified," the ghost's voice echoed. distorted but recognizable. My death was not accidental. The evidence is in the... The apparition froze, its face contorted in digital agony before continuing. Neural archival bank. Someone in the council ordered my silence. They know humans have discovered... The ghost fractured into pixelated shards as security protocols engaged, but not before the ghost's eyes seemed to lock directly with Alara's across the chamber. Pandemonium erupted. Arcturan security forces converged on the platform, their harmonic language shifting to staccato emergency tones. High Judge Vek's composure slipped momentarily, his copper face darkening to a deep bronze, the Arcturan physiological response to extreme stress or anger. "Apprehend all humans present," Vek commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This sacrilege is a violation of the temporal accords and an act of aggression against the Arcturan sector." Kiran's hand closed around Alara's wrist. "Time to go, Doctor," he said urgently, "unless you want to spend the next solar cycle in an Arcturan questioning chamber." "But I didn't. I had nothing to do with that AI," Alara protested, even as she allowed him to pull her toward a service corridor. "Doesn't matter," Kiran replied, his eyes scanning for pursuit. "You're human. You were close to Julian, and that ghost just accused the Council of murder. You're automatically the prime suspect." As they slipped through a maintenance hatch, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Ilara's scientist mind raced, cataloging facts even as they fled. AI ghosts were banned after the consciousness wars precisely because they preserved fragments of personality and memory that sometimes contradicted official narratives. Creating one required specialized equipment and intimate neural mapping, something Julian would never have consented to without telling her. Unless he had suspected something, unless he had feared for his life. "My research," she gasped as they hurried through the narrow corridor. "My quarters, all my data on Julian's last mission." "No time," Kiran cut her off, leading her down a branching passage. "Security will lock down your quarters first. Our only play is to get off this station before they seal the docking bays." They emerged into a lower-level docking area where smaller vessels were moored. Kiran led her to a battered freighter that had clearly seen better decades. "The Star Dancer," he said, slapping his palm against the entry panel. "Not pretty, but she's fast, and her transponder is flexible." Inside, the ship was a curious blend of cutting-edge modifications and salvaged parts. Kiran slid into the pilot's seat with practiced ease, his fingers dancing across the controls. "Arcturus Port Authority, this is Independent Freighter Star Dancer requesting emergency departure clearance," he announced, winking at Alara. "Perishable medical supplies aboard." While he handled the departure protocols, Alara found herself drawn to the viewport. The orbital platform gleamed against the darkness, beautiful and suddenly hostile. Somewhere in there were answers about Julian, about what he had discovered that was worth killing for. "Clearance denied, Star Dancer," came the port controller's voice. "All departures suspended by security directive." "Well," Kiran sighed, flipping a series of switches. "So much for the polite approach." He engaged the ship's engines, the deck vibrating beneath their feet as power surged through the systems. "You're just going to leave without clearance?" Alara asked, gripping a handrail as the ship detached from its moorings. "I prefer to think of it as creating our own clearance," Kiran replied, his attention fixed on the controls. "Better sit down and strap in. This might get interesting." The Star Dancer lurched forward, accelerating toward the station's defensive perimeter. Warning signals flashed across the console as automated systems detected their unauthorized departure. "They're activating the particle net," Alara warned, watching the security grid power up ahead of them. "I see it," Kiran said, his cocky demeanor giving way to focused concentration. He adjusted their course, aiming for a maintenance gate where the grid appeared thinner. This is going to be close. The ship shuddered as defensive beams lanced past them, more warning than attack for now. Kiran pushed the engines harder, the aging freighter protesting the sudden demand for speed. "Why are you helping me?" Alara asked suddenly, realizing she had fled with a virtual stranger. Kiran's eyes remained on the viewport. "Julian saved my life once. Figured I owed him one. Besides," he added, his voice tightening as he executed a rolling maneuver to slip through a gap in the security grid, "I'm not exactly welcome in Arcturan jurisdiction myself these days." They broke through the perimeter, the vast expanse of space opening before them. Behind, the orbital platform diminished rapidly as Kiran pushed the ship to full speed, plotting a course away from the main shipping lanes. Alara felt the adrenaline drain from her system, leaving her hollow and shaking. Julian was truly gone, and now, because of a ghost she hadn't created, she was a fugitive from the very authorities she had petitioned for answers. "What now?" she asked quietly. Kiran set the ship on autopilot and turned to face her. The carefree smuggler was gone, replaced by someone harder, more calculating. "Now we find out what Julian discovered that got him killed," he said, "and who on the Arcturan Council wanted it buried badly enough to commit murder." Alara met his gaze, finding unexpected resolve within herself. "I'm a xenopsychologist," she said. "I study how different species think. If someone on the council is hiding something, I'll figure out their patterns." "Good," Kiran nodded, "because we're going to need every advantage we can get." He pulled up a star chart on the main console. "I know a place where we can start looking for answers, but it's not exactly on the tourist routes." The map zoomed in on a remote system at the edge of the Arcturus sector, marked by warning symbols in multiple languages. "The Forgotten Archives," Alara breathed, recognizing the location from Julian's research. "But that's a restricted zone, ancient alien ruins under archaeological protection." Kiran's mouth curved into a sardonic smile. "Convenient place to hide something you don't want found, wouldn't you say?" As the Star Dancer accelerated toward the jump point, Alara gazed back at the receding orbital station, now just another light among countless stars. Somewhere in this vast sector was the truth about Julian's death. And somehow, the universe had conspired to pair her with a smuggler who seemed as determined to find it as she was. "Even the universe knows," she murmured, "that some secrets shouldn't stay buried." The Star Dancer dropped out of hyperspace with a bone-jarring shudder, internal gravity fluctuating momentarily before stabilizing. Alara unclenched her white-knuckled grip on the co-pilot's chair and exhaled slowly. "That's not supposed to happen, is it?" she asked, eyeing Kiran as he frowned at the blinking diagnostic panel. "Technically, no," he admitted, running a quick systems check. "But hyperdrives aren't exactly designed for rapid, unplanned escapes from heavily guarded orbital platforms." He tapped a gauge that was hovering in the red zone. "We're fine, mostly." "Mostly," Alara echoed flatly. "Welcome to life outside the academic bubble, Doctor." Kiran's tone was light, but she caught the tension beneath it. "Things get messy out here in the real universe." Through the viewport, a desolate landscape stretched before them. The Forgotten Archives, a massive complex of alien ruins spanning half a continent on this airless moon, once the cultural repository of a long-vanished civilization, now a restricted zone supposedly under the joint protection of all spacefaring species. "There's a reason this place is restricted," Alara said, bringing up Julian's research notes on her portable terminal. She'd managed to grab it during their hasty escape. "The technology found here has been deemed too disruptive to current power structures. Some artifacts can manipulate consciousness itself." "Like AI ghosts?" Kiran suggested, bringing the ship down toward a relatively flat area near the ruins' perimeter. "Possibly," she conceded, Julian's last reports mentioned breakthrough findings in the neural archives section, but he never specified what they were. She scrolled through the encrypted files, frustration mounting. Half these files are redacted or locked behind council authorization codes. Kieran landed the ship with more care than she would have expected, powering down non-essential systems to minimize their detection signature. Good thing I know someone who specializes in unauthorized access. Then, he said with a hint of pride. A hacker? An information liberation specialist, he corrected with a wink. But first, we need environmental suits. The atmosphere out there isn't just thin, it's non-existent. They suited up in the ship's cramped preparation chamber. Kieran's suit was clearly custom-made, with additional pockets and modifications that spoke of frequent extravehicular activity. He helped Alara adjust her standard-issue scientific exploration suit, his movements efficient and unexpectedly gentle. "You've done this before," she observed. "Helped a beautiful scientist break into restricted alien ruins to investigate a murder conspiracy?" He grinned behind his helmet visor. "Surprisingly, no. That's a first, even for me." "I meant helping someone with an EVA suit," Alara replied dryly, though she couldn't quite suppress a small smile. It felt strange on her face, the first since Julian's death. "I knew what you meant." Kieran checked her oxygen readouts. "And yes, I've spent more time in these suits than out of them in certain periods of my life. You learn to be thorough when your next breath depends on it." Outside, the lunar landscape stretched in all directions, bathed in the eerie red light of Arcturus. The ruins rose from the horizon like the skeleton of some vast creature, gleaming structures of unknown material that had withstood millennia of cosmic radiation and micrometeorite impacts. "The neural archives should be in the central complex," Alara said, consulting the map Julian had annotated. "About 2 kilometers from here." They set off across the barren surface, each step launching them slightly upward in the low gravity. Alara quickly adapted her movements, finding a rhythm that conserved energy and maintained direction. Years of fieldwork on various exoplanets had prepared her better than Kieran might have expected. "So," Kieran's voice came through the comm system, "how does a xenopsychologist end up with a diplomatic liaison? Seems like an odd match." Alara considered ignoring the personal question, but the long walk ahead made conversation a welcome distraction. Julian was more than just a diplomat. He was a cultural anthropologist, studied how different species built societies and related to each other. "We met at a conference on non-human consciousness patterns." "Sounds romantic," Kieran teased. "It was, actually," she replied, surprising herself with her candor. "He challenged my presentation on Arcturan decision hierarchies, said I was misinterpreting their temporal perspective." A bittersweet memory surfaced. "We argued for 3 hours after the session ended. By the time we realized everyone else had gone to dinner, we'd both shifted our positions and developed a new theoretical framework. And they say academics don't know how to flirt." They continued in companionable silence until they reached the perimeter of the central complex. Here, the ancient structures rose hundreds of meters above them, their surfaces inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. "Security checkpoint ahead," Kieran warned, pointing to a modern installation nestled among the ruins, a stark contrast of utilitarian design against the fluid architecture of the ancients. "It should be automated," Alara said. "Minimal staff, if any. The Council doesn't waste resources on permanent guards when automated systems are cheaper." "Never underestimate bureaucratic corner-cutting," Kieran agreed. He unholstered a compact device from his suit. "Wait here, I'll loop their sensors." Before she could protest, he bounded off toward the checkpoint in low, controlled jumps. Alara watched as he approached the facility from a blind spot, attaching something to an external panel. After a tense minute, he waved her forward. Convince the system we're an authorized maintenance crew, he explained as they passed through the checkpoint. It'll show us on the logs, but flag us as routine. Unless someone's specifically watching this sector, we should be fine for a few hours. The interior of the complex opened into a vast chamber, the ceiling lost in darkness above. Unlike the lunar surface, this space had been sealed and pressurized, allowing them to remove their helmets after Kiran checked the atmospheric readings. Breathable, but thin, he advised. Don't exert yourself unnecessarily. Alara was barely listening, her attention captured by the architecture surrounding them. Columns that seemed to be made of solid light supported impossible arches. Surfaces that appeared solid from one angle revealed themselves to be intricate lattices from another. And everywhere, the shifting symbols that had been present outside were here in abundance, glowing with subtle luminescence. It's responding to our presence, she whispered, noticing how the patterns changed as they moved through the space. The entire structure is like a living neural network. That's not creepy at all, Kiran muttered, keeping his hand near his weapon. They followed Julian's map deeper into the complex, through chambers that defied conventional physics and corridors that seemed to fold space itself. Finally, they reached a circular room with a central pedestal. Unlike the other spaces, this one was cluttered with modern research equipment, abandoned in haste, judging by the scattered datapads and half-empty containers. This was Julian's research station, Alara confirmed, recognizing his organizational style in the layout. She moved to a workstation, activating the interface. If I can access his local files, they might not have the same security restrictions as the copies I have. While she worked, Kiran explored the perimeter of the room, examining the ancient technology with cautious curiosity. What exactly was he researching here, he asked. The neural archives were a repository of consciousness patterns, Alara explained, her fingers moving swiftly over the interface. Not unlike our modern AI ghosts, but vastly more sophisticated. The ancients believed consciousness was the fundamental currency of the universe, more valuable than any material resource. Sounds like philosophy, not science, Kiran commented. Alara smiled faintly. The line blurs when you're dealing with civilizations this advanced. They weren't just preserving memories or personality constructs. According to Julian's theories, they were mapping the actual structure of consciousness itself, finding the patterns that transcend species differences. And why would that get him killed? Before she could answer, the workstation chimed. I'm in, she said, leaning forward intently. These are his personal logs, unredacted. Julian's face appeared on the screen, looking more tired than she remembered. The timestamp indicated the recording was made just days before his death. Alara, if you're seeing this, something's gone wrong, his recorded image said, causing her breath to catch. What I've discovered here goes beyond academic interest. The neural archives don't just contain records of the ancients, they contain fragments of every species that's ever studied them, including Arcturans and humans. The recording continued, Julian's expression growing more intense. The patterns show something the Council has been hiding for centuries. Humans and Arcturans share a fundamental consciousness structure that's nearly identical, despite our completely different evolutionary paths. We're not just compatible, we're complementary. The implications for the power structure of the sector are significant. That doesn't seem worth killing over, Kiran frowned, now standing behind Alara. Julian's recording seemed to answer, High Judge Vec accessed the archives 3 standard months ago. He discovered what I've found, but also something else. Evidence that the Arcturan evolutionary narrative is false. They weren't the first advanced species in this sector as their doctrine claims. They were uplifted by the ancients, just like dozens of other species. Their entire claim to authority is based on a myth. Alara felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. Vex's entire power base rests on Arcturan exceptionalism. If this got out, the council would collapse, Kieran finished, and with it, his control over the sector's resources. Julian's recording continued. I've secured the original data in a quantum-locked file, accessible only with my neural pattern, or, he smiled sadly, yours, Elara. We mapped our patterns together that night on Callisto. Remember? The file is hidden in... The recording abruptly cut off, replaced by an automated security alert. Red text scrolled across the screen. Perimeter breach detected. Security forces approaching. That's our cue to leave, Kieran said, already moving toward the exit. Did he say where the file was hidden? No, Elara replied, quickly downloading what she could from the workstation. But I know what he meant about Callisto. I can find it. As they rushed back through the complex, Elara's mind raced. Julian had discovered something that threatened the very foundation of Arcturan authority, and paid with his life. Now she had become the inheritor of his dangerous knowledge, with a smuggler as her only ally. They reached the exterior just as a security shuttle descended near the checkpoint they'd bypassed earlier. Change of plans, Kieran muttered, pulling her behind a collapsed column. We can't go back the way we came. Elara pointed to a secondary structure about half a kilometer away. Julian's notes mentioned emergency evacuation tunnels from the auxiliary research stations. They lead to the southern landing zone, which is hopefully far from where our new friends are setting up their welcome party, Kieran said grimly. Let's move. They donned their helmets and set off across the lunar surface, keeping low and using the ruins as cover. Behind them, searchlights began sweeping the landscape as Arcturan security forces deployed. If we get separated, Kieran said as they ran, the Stardancer's emergency protocols will respond to this. He pressed something into her hand, a small transmitter with a single button. It'll bring the ship to you on autopilot. What about you? She asked, securing the device to her suit. His laugh crackled through the comm. I've escaped from worse situations than this. Usually caused them myself. Actually, they reached the auxiliary structure and located the evacuation tunnel, a narrow passage that would take them beneath the security perimeter. As they prepared to enter, Elara paused, looking back at the majestic ruins silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Julian loved this place, she said softly. He believed understanding the ancients was the key to our future as a species. Then let's make sure his discovery doesn't die here, Kieran replied, his voice gentler than she'd heard before. After you, Doctor. As they descended into the tunnel, Elara felt a renewed sense of purpose cutting through her grief. Julian had entrusted her with the truth, had believed she could carry it forward. She wouldn't let him down, not while stars still burned in the sky above. The Stardancer hurled through hyperspace, its engines straining at dangerous levels. In the cockpit, Kieran's fingers danced across the controls, making minute adjustments to their course as warning indicators flashed across the console. Tell me again why we can't slow down, Elara asked, gripping her seat as the ship shuddered around them. Because, Kieran replied, his usual levity absent. There are 2 Arcturan enforcement vessels on our tail, and they don't share my enthusiasm for pushing outdated hyperdrives beyond their safety limits. He glanced at a blinking proximity sensor. They're cautious. We're desperate. Temporary advantage. Us. Their escape from the Forgotten Archives had been narrow. After navigating the evacuation tunnels, they'd emerged to find a security perimeter being established around the entire complex. Only Kieran's intimate knowledge of sensor blind spots and Elara's quick thinking to trigger an archive defense system as a diversion had allowed them to reach the Stardancer and break atmosphere before being intercepted. We can't outrun the Arcturan fleet forever, Elara pointed out, already thinking ahead. We need somewhere to analyze what we found and plan our next move. Way ahead of you, Kieran said, pulling up a star chart. There's a place in the Venturi Nebula, neutral territory, technically outside Arcturan jurisdiction, the Celestial Crown. A casino. Alara frowned, recognizing the infamous establishment. That's your idea of a safe haven? It's not just any casino, Kieran countered. It's the largest entertainment complex in 3 sectors, with enough wealthy patrons that even the Arcturans tread carefully there. Plus, he added with a hint of his characteristic grin, the owner owes me a favor. Let me guess, you smuggled something valuable for them? Actually, I won it from him in a game of quantum shuffle, then gave it back. He was so impressed with the gesture. He promised me sanctuary if I ever needed it. Kieran's expression turned sheepish at Alara's skeptical look. Fine, I also may have helped his daughter escape an arranged marriage to an Arcturan ministerial aide, but the part about the game is true. Alara shook her head, but found herself smiling despite the circumstances. There was something irrepressibly human about Kieran's ability to find humor in their dire situation. It reminded her of Julian in a way that was painful but also comforting. The Star Dancer dropped out of hyperspace hours later, the brilliant gases of the Venturi Nebula swirling outside the viewport. Nestled within the colorful cosmic cloud was an artificial structure of staggering proportions, a ring-shaped space station adorned with countless lights and docking spires, resembling nothing so much as a crown floating among the stars. The Celestial Crown, Kieran announced unnecessarily, where fortunes are won and lost between breaths, and everyone's secrets are for sale, except those who can afford to keep them. Charming, Alara remarked dryly. It grows on you, he assured her as he guided the ship toward a private docking bay on the station's underside, like a particularly tenacious fungus. Once docked, Kieran led her through service corridors rather than the main promenades, avoiding the crowds and surveillance systems that monitored the casino's public areas. They emerged in a luxurious suite overlooking the nebula, the swirling gases casting an ever-changing light across the opulent furnishings. Welcome to the Phantom Suite, Kieran said, activating the room's privacy protocols. Off the official registry and shielded from standard scans. We should be safe here while we figure out our next steps. Alara moved to the vast viewport, watching the cosmic spectacle outside. How exactly does a smuggler afford a place like this? I don't, Kieran admitted, opening a hidden panel to reveal a small bar. Like I said, the owner owes me. Drink? She declined with a shake of her head, instead retrieving her data terminal. We need to focus on what Julian discovered. If we can access that quantum-locked file, we'll have concrete evidence of what got him killed. Kieran poured himself a small glass of amber liquid. And how exactly do we access a file that requires Julian's neural pattern when Julian is... He trailed off, realizing too late the insensitivity of his question. Dead? Alara finished for him, her voice steady. Julian said the file would respond to my pattern too. He mentioned Callisto, a moon of Jupiter where we spent 3 days mapping our neural responses to various stimuli. It was part of a research project on interpersonal neurological synchronization. That sounds intimate, Kieran observed carefully. It was, she confirmed, not elaborating further. The point is, somewhere in these files should be a key that resonates with my neural pattern. Julian would have made it something meaningful to both of us. While Alara worked, Kieran secured the suite, checking for surveillance devices and setting up additional countermeasures of his own. When he was satisfied with their security, he joined her at the data terminal, watching as she scrolled through encrypted files. Can I help? He asked after several minutes of silence. She glanced up, momentarily surprised by his proximity. Actually, yes. You've dealt with quantum encryption before, I assume. I've had occasion to transport items that certain parties preferred remained unopenable during transit, he replied diplomatically. Then you know quantum-locked files often have physical anchors, objects that resonate at the same frequency as the encryption key. She pulled up a file listing. I think one of these is a marker that will lead us to that anchor. They worked together for hours, Kieran's practical knowledge of security systems complementing Alara's scientific approach. As artificial night fell over the casino station, they found themselves surrounded by data pads and holographic projections. The suite transformed into an impromptu research lab. Wait, Kieran said suddenly, pointing to a recurring pattern in the data streams. This sequence keeps appearing in fragments. It's not just code, it's coordinates. Alara followed his insight, isolating the pattern. You're right. These are stellar coordinates, but they're incomplete. She frowned, thinking. Julian once told me that when hiding something truly valuable, the best place is somewhere so obvious that no one thinks to look there, like hiding a diamond in a bowl of costume jewelry. Kieran nodded. So what's the obvious place he'd hide coordinates to something this important? Alara's eyes widened as realization struck. The memorial service. Julian knew the council would have to acknowledge his death publicly. What if he encoded the final coordinates into the official memorial record itself, which would be filed in the Arcturan Central Registry? Kieran groaned. Great, so we just need to break into the most secure data repository in the sector. No problem. Not necessarily, Alara countered, already pulling up a new interface. All diplomatic records are mirrored to multiple locations for redundancy, including the Celestial Crown's administrative archives. Kieran finished, catching on. Because it's a neutral meeting ground for diplomatic functions. He grinned broadly. Dr. Knox, I believe you've just found our next objective. And it's right beneath us, she confirmed. The question is, how do we access a restricted administrative archive in the middle of the most surveilled entertainment complex in the sector? Kieran's smile turned mischievous. Well, as it happens, I have some experience causing distractions in establishments like this one. Why am I not surprised? The Crown is hosting its annual Nebula Gala tomorrow night, he continued, pulling up the station's event calendar. Every high roller and dignitary in the sector will be there, including, he zoomed in on the guest list, High Judge Maros Vec himself. Alara's breath caught. Vec? Here? That's too dangerous. Actually, it's perfect, Kieran countered. While security is focused on protecting the dignitaries, we can exploit gaps in their coverage to access the archives. Plus, he added with a meaningful look, it gives us a chance to get close to Vec, maybe plant some surveillance of our own. You want to spy on the being who likely ordered Julian's murder while surrounded by his security detail, in the middle of a gala we're not invited to? Alara summarized incredulously. When you put it that way, it sounds almost exciting, Kieran replied with a wink. But yes, that's essentially the plan, unless you have a better one. Alara stared at him for a long moment, then sighed. Unfortunately, I don't, but we'll need disguises, credentials, and a way to move freely through restricted areas. Leave the logistics to me, Kieran assured her. You focus on figuring out exactly what we're looking for in those archives. And maybe, he added, gesturing to their disheveled appearance after days of space travel and narrow escapes. We should both clean up a bit. Can't infiltrate a high society gala looking like fugitives, can we? Later, after utilizing the suite's luxurious refresher facilities, Alara stood before the viewport again, watching the nebula's cosmic dance. She felt Julian's absence keenly in moments like this. He would have loved the scientific spectacle, would have pointed out the astrophysical processes creating the swirls of color and light. He must have known the risks, she said quietly when she sensed Kieran approaching. Julian wasn't naive about Arcturan politics. He must have known what would happen if they discovered what he'd found. Chiron stood beside her, his own gaze fixed on the nebula. "Some truths are worth the risk," he said simply. "Your partner believed that, or he wouldn't have left you the means to finish what he started." "And you?" she asked, turning to study his profile. "What's worth the risk to a smuggler who could be halfway across the galaxy by now, safely away from Arcturan jurisdiction?" He met her eyes, his usual facade of casual charm slipping to reveal something more genuine beneath. "Let's just say I've spent most of my life running toward things other people run away from. It's not always the smartest strategy, but it's led me to the most worthwhile moments." A small smile tugged at his lips, like breaking into ancient alien ruins with a brilliant xenopsychologist on a quest for justice. Despite everything, the danger, the grief, the uncertainty of their mission, Alara found herself smiling back. There was something undeniably magnetic about Chiron Vale, a gravitational pull that made his ridiculous plan seem almost reasonable. "Get some rest, Doctor," he said, gently squeezing her shoulder before moving away. "Tomorrow, we crash the most exclusive party in the sector and steal secrets from under the nose of the most powerful judge in Arcturan space." "When you put it that way," Alara echoed his earlier words, "it sounds almost exciting." As she prepared for sleep in one of the suite's opulent bedrooms, Alara realized that for the first time since Julian's death, she was looking forward to tomorrow. Not with hope, exactly, but with purpose, and perhaps the faintest glimmer of something that felt like anticipation. Outside, the nebula continued its ancient dance, cosmic dust and gas forming patterns that would disperse and reform over millennia. Patterns not unlike consciousness itself, she thought, as sleep finally claimed her, ephemeral yet persistent, shaped by forces both seen and unseen. The Nebula Gala transformed the main promenade of the Celestial Crown into a shimmering tableau of wealth and influence. Gravity modulators created floating platforms where elegantly dressed beings from a dozen species mingled above an enormous holographic display of the nebula itself, giving guests the illusion of drifting through the cosmic phenomenon. "Remember," Chiron's voice came through the discreet communicator in Alara's ear, "we're Dr. Amara Voss and Thaddeus Kent, representatives of the Centauri Archaeological Consortium. Our credentials will hold up to basic scrutiny, but avoid prolonged conversations with anyone who might actually know something about archaeology. I've published 3 papers on xenoarchaeological impact on psychological development across species," Alara muttered, adjusting the unfamiliar weight of her elaborate gown, the deep blue fabric, embedded with microscopic light emitters that mimicked starlight, had been delivered to their suite that morning along with Chiron's formal attire. "I think I can manage a conversation about archaeology." "Show off," Chiron replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. He materialized from the crowd, and Alara had to admit that the formal attire suited him surprisingly well. The severe lines of the jacket emphasized his height, while the subtle shimmer of the fabric complemented her own ensemble. "You clean up nicely, smuggler," she commented as he offered his arm. "A necessary skill in my line of work," he replied with a wink. "Sometimes the best way to move contraband is right through the front door, dressed like you own the place." They made their way through the gala, accepting drinks from floating service drones and exchanging pleasantries with other guests. Chiron played his role with an ease that suggested he'd done this many times before, while Alara found herself drawing on her academic experience of navigating conference receptions. Different context, similar social dynamics. "Vec is on the upper observation deck," Chiron murmured after consulting his ocular implant, which was surreptitiously linked to the station's security feeds. "Surrounded by aides and security, as expected." "And the administrative archives?" Alara asked, smiling brightly at a passing dignitary. 3 levels down, Section 42B, limited security presence due to the gala, but still requiring high-level clearance. He guided her toward a quieter area of the promenade, which is why we need this. From an inside pocket, he produced a small device that resembled an ornate bracelet. Security token duplicator, he explained, slipping it onto her wrist. It needs to get within 10 centimeters of a valid admin-level credential for at least 3 seconds. Once it captures the signature, you'll have about 20 minutes before the system detects the anomaly. And how exactly am I supposed to get that close to someone with admin credentials without raising suspicion? Alara asked, though she already suspected the answer. Kiran's grin confirmed her fears. I've always found that spilling a drink works wonders for creating momentary chaos. Just make sure you're apologizing profusely while getting very close to their personal space. This is ridiculous, she muttered, but accepted the delicate glass he handed her. What will you be doing while I'm playing clumsy socialite? Creating our exit strategy and planting a little surveillance of my own near Vec, he replied. The judge won't recognize me, but he might remember you from the memorial service. Best if we work separately for now. Alara nodded, surveying the crowd for potential targets. Her gaze settled on an Arcturan in administrative robes, speaking with a group of lesser officials near a refreshment station. I think I've found my mark, she said. Wish me luck. You don't need luck, Doctor, Kiran replied with unexpected sincerity. You've got something better, righteous anger and a very quick mind. Before she could respond to the compliment, he had disappeared into the crowd, leaving her to implement their less-than-sophisticated plan. Taking a deep breath, Alara approached the administrative group, listening to their conversation to find an entry point. They were discussing recent changes to import regulations, mundane bureaucratic talk that she could easily join with her knowledge of interspecies trade protocols. Excuse me, she interjected during a natural pause, putting on her most charming academic smile. I couldn't help overhearing your discussion about the new certification requirements. We've been experiencing similar challenges with archaeological specimen transport in the Centauri sector. The administrator turned to her with the Arcturan equivalent of polite interest, a slight tilt of the head that exposed more of the sensitive auditory organs on the left side of their neck. The consortium's concerns have been noted in the regulatory review, they said in the formal tones of a mid-level bureaucrat. Oh, you're familiar with our work? Alara improvised, taking a small step closer. We've just published findings that might impact the review process. Perhaps I could send you the preliminary data? As the conversation continued, she maneuvered closer to the administrator, making sure to gesture animatedly with the hand holding her drink. At the perfect moment, when the administrator was reaching for their own beverage, she executed a flawlessly clumsy collision. Oh, I'm so terribly sorry, she exclaimed, as liquid splashed across the administrator's robes. Setting her glass down, she immediately began dabbing at the spill with a napkin, moving deliberately into the Arcturan's personal space. The bracelet on her wrist glowed subtly as it came within range of the administrator's credentials. Please, it's unnecessary, the Arcturan protested, clearly uncomfortable with the physical proximity, but too polite to create a scene. I insist, Alara persisted until she felt the bracelet give 3 quick pulses against her skin, confirmation that the credential had been duplicated. There, I think that's the best I can do. Please send the cleaning bill to the consortium. Dr. Amara Voss, I'm in the registry. Extracting herself from the now thoroughly annoyed group, she made her way toward the edge of the promenade, activating her communicator. Token acquired, moving to Phase 2. Well done, Kiran's voice replied. Meet me at Access Junction 7, and hurry, we've got company. Alara felt a chill at his tone. What kind of company? The kind that carries neural disruptors and doesn't smile much, he answered tersely. Arcturan security, looking like they're hunting for someone, us, presumably, maintaining a casual pace to avoid attention. Ilara navigated through the gala toward the service corridor Kieran had indicated. As she passed a group of human merchants, she overheard a fragment of conversation that made her pause. Said the Arcturans are locking down all human research permits after some incident at the archives. Heard it was espionage, something about forbidden technology, just another excuse to push us out of the sector. The implications were clear. The Arcturan Council was using their escape from the archives to justify broader restrictions on human activities throughout the sector. Julian's discovery was being buried under layers of diplomatic maneuvering and xenophobic policy. When she reached the access junction, Kieran was already there, his formal attire now complemented by what appeared to be a maintenance worker's tool belt. "Quick change?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Amazing what you can find in service lockers when you know the override codes," he replied, handing her a technician's jacket to slip over her gown. "The duplicated credentials should get us into the archives, but will attract less attention looking like we belong in the maintenance areas." They descended through service corridors, passing the occasional drone or worker who paid them little mind thanks to their disguises. 3 levels down, they reached a nondescript doorway marked only with administrative codes. "This is it," Kieran confirmed, glancing at his ocular display. "Security sweep in the adjacent corridor. We have about 2 minutes before they pass this section." Ilara pressed the duplicated credentials against the access panel. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the panel glowed green and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the administrative archives were a stark contrast to the opulence of the gala above. Utilitarian shelving units housing both physical media and data crystal arrays, organized with typical Arcturan precision. "The memorial records would be under diplomatic proceedings," Ilara said, quickly orienting herself to the filing system. "Section J, subsection 27, if they're following standard protocols." They moved efficiently through the archives, finding the relevant section and accessing the data terminal embedded in the shelving unit. Ilara inserted her personal device, initiating a search for Julian's memorial record. "How much time do we have?" she asked, watching the data stream between devices. Kieran checked his display. 12 minutes before the credential duplication is likely to be flagged, less if that administrator reports the accident to security. The search completed, bringing up the official record of Julian's memorial service, a dry procedural document that reduced his life and death to administrative notation. Ilara felt a fresh wave of anger as she scanned the text, looking for anything out of place. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a sequence of characters in the location designation. "These aren't standard Arcturan spatial coordinates. They're offset by a specific frequency, one that Julian and I used in our neural mapping research." She quickly transferred the data to her device and ran it through a decryption algorithm tuned to her own neural pattern. The characters rearranged themselves, forming a new set of coordinates. "The Veil Nebula," she breathed, recognizing the location. "There's a decommissioned research station there, abandoned after the boundary disputes. Julian mentioned it once, said it would be the perfect place to hide if you wanted to disappear from official records." "Then that's where we'll find the quantum-locked file," Kieran concluded. "But first, we need to get out of here without being detained by increasingly alert security forces." As if on cue, an alarm began to sound, not the blaring emergency signal they might have expected, but a soft, pulsing tone that indicated a security anomaly had been detected. "So much for our 20 minutes, Kieran muttered, disconnecting Ilara's device from the terminal. "Plan B it is." "We had a plan B?" Ilara asked, following him toward the rear of the archives. "Always," he assured her, approaching what appeared to be a maintenance hatch. The Crown was built with multiple evacuation routes after that unfortunate incident with the methane-breathing Gorganians. This service tunnel connects to the secondary docking bay where I arranged for an automated shuttle to be waiting. And the Star Dancer? Already programmed to rendezvous with us once we're clear of the station. He worked the manual override on the hatch. One of the advantages of having a ship with questionable registration, you can make it disappear and reappear without filling out forms in triplicate. They had just entered the service tunnel when Alara's communicator chirped with an incoming transmission. To her surprise, it wasn't from Kieran's frequency. "Dr. Knox," came a resonant voice that sent ice through her veins. "This is High Judge Maros Vec. I believe you have something that belongs to the Arcturan Council." Kieran froze, shooting her a questioning look. She activated the communicator, keeping her voice steady. "I wasn't aware that truth had an owner, Judge Vec." "An interesting philosophical position," Vec replied, his tone almost conversational. "But I was referring to the stolen security credentials currently being used to access restricted archives. Credentials which, I should note, have led my security forces directly to your location." As if to emphasize his point, they heard the distinctive sound of security doors sealing at both ends of the service tunnel. "We're trapped," Alara whispered, the reality of their situation sinking in. "Not exactly," Kieran countered, already examining the tunnel walls. "The judge is being theatrical. Standard intimidation tactic. These tunnels have emergency access points every 50 meters. Regulation requirement." On the communicator, Vec continued, "Dr. Knox, I understand your distress regarding Julian Reeves. He was a valued liaison, but these accusations of council involvement in his death are not just false, they're dangerous. Return to Arcturan jurisdiction voluntarily, and I give you my word that leniency will be considered." "The way Julian received leniency?" Alara couldn't help retorting. "No, thank you, Judge Vec. I prefer to take my chances with the truth he died protecting." "A regrettable decision," Vec sighed. "Though not unexpected, humans always choose the difficult path, even when a simpler one is offered." The communication ended abruptly as Kieran located an access panel hidden behind a section of wall paneling. "Found it," he announced triumphantly. "Emergency exit to the external maintenance platforms. From there, we can reach the secondary docking bay." "Won't they be monitoring those areas now?" Alara asked as he worked to open the panel. "Absolutely," he confirmed cheerfully, "but they'll be expecting us to head for the main docking levels. The secondary bay is primarily for waste disposal and service vehicles. Much less glamorous, much less guarded." The panel slid open, revealing a narrow passage beyond. "Ladies first," Kieran gestured with mock formality. "How chivalrous," Alara replied dryly, but squeezed through the opening without further protest. The passage led to an external maintenance platform, a precarious walkway that circled the station's outer ring. Through the transparent safety field, the Venturi Nebula swirled in cosmic majesty, a stark backdrop to their desperate escape. "This way," Kieran directed, leading her along the platform toward a utility lift. "The docking bay is one level down." They had almost reached the lift when a security door slid open ahead of them, disgorging 4 Arcturan security officers, their neural disruptors drawn and ready. "Stop where you are," commanded the lead officer, "by order of High Judge Vec." Kieran pushed Alara behind him, his hand moving to a concealed weapon at his waist. "Now, gentlemen," he began in his most charming tone, "I'm sure we can discuss this like reasonable beings from—" He never finished the sentence. With a swift motion, he threw something small and cylindrical toward the officers, then pulled Alara down to the platform floor. A brilliant flash of light erupted, followed by a high-pitched whine that made her ears ring despite Kieran's warning. "Sensory overload grenade," he explained as he pulled her to her feet. "Non-lethal, but extremely disorienting, especially to Arcturan neurology. They'll recover in about 3 minutes." They rushed past the incapacitated officers, reaching the utility lift and descending to the secondary docking level, as promised. An automated shuttle waited in one of the smaller bays, its engines already warming. "I've programmed it to take a randomized route to the rendezvous coordinates," Kieran explained as they boarded. "The Star Dancer will pick us up once we're clear of the station's security net." The shuttle detached from the docking clamps with a metallic groan, maneuvering away from the celestial crown on auxiliary thrusters. Through the viewport, Elara watched the magnificent structure recede, its brilliance diminished neither by distance nor by the knowledge of what had transpired within its walls. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she said quietly. "Vec, he'll keep coming after us as long as we threaten his power." Kieran settled into the pilot's seat, making minor adjustments to their course. "Probably," he agreed. "But then again, we're not going to stop either, are we?" Despite everything, the danger, the narrow escape, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, Elara found herself smiling. "No," she agreed, "we're not." As the shuttle accelerated toward the rendezvous point, Elara studied the coordinates they'd discovered in the archives. The Veil Nebula was several days' journey away, even with a functioning hyperdrive, days during which Vec and his forces would be hunting them across the sector. But somewhere in that distant cosmic cloud was the truth Julian had died to protect, the evidence that could reshape the power structure of the entire Arcturus sector, and Elara was determined to find it, no matter what obstacles Vec placed in their path. Beside her, Kieran began the pre-jump calculations, his movements confident despite the pressure. There was something reassuring about his presence. She realized, a steadiness beneath the charismatic facade that reminded her, in some ways, of Julian. Not the same, but perhaps exactly what she needed in this moment. The stars outside blurred as the shuttle prepared to jump to hyperspace. Elara thought of Julian, of the truth he had entrusted to her, and of the unlikely ally fate had provided for her journey. Whatever awaited them at the Veil Nebula, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her this far. "Even the universe knows," she murmured, echoing her earlier sentiment, "that some secrets are meant to be revealed." The decommissioned research station hung in the outer reaches of the Veil Nebula like a forgotten sentinel, its once sleek contours now weathered by decades of cosmic radiation and micrometeorite impacts. The Star Dancer approached cautiously, passive sensors scanning for any signs of activity. "No power signatures," Kieran reported from the pilot's seat. "No active defense systems. If there's anything still functioning in there, it's running on minimal emergency protocols." After their narrow escape from the Celestial Crown, they had rendezvoused with the Star Dancer as planned, then plotted a circuitous route to the Veil Nebula, using asteroid fields and nebula clouds to mask their trajectory from potential pursuers. The journey had taken 4 days, 4 days of shared quarters, improvised meals, and increasingly comfortable silences as they each processed the revelations of the past week. "Life support?" Elara asked, studying the station schematics on her display. "Minimal, according to these readings. Enough oxygen being recycled to sustain 2 humans for about 6 hours. Temperatures low, but survivable with thermal gear." He glanced at her. "Ready for another spacewalk, Doctor?" They docked with the station's auxiliary port, the magnetic clamps engaging with a dull thud that reverberated through the Star Dancer's hull. Suited up in their environmental gear, they cycled through the airlock and entered the abandoned facility. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they moved through the corridors, motion sensors still functional after all these years. The station's interior was a testament to pragmatic design, efficient workspaces, minimal amenities, everything arranged for maximum utility rather than comfort. Julian said this place was used for deep space observation before the boundary disputes, Elara explained as they navigated through the station. When Arcturan forces pushed humans back from this sector, it was abandoned in the retreat. Most of the sensitive equipment was supposed to be destroyed to prevent it from falling into Arcturan hands. But something was left behind, Kieran guessed. Something Julian found. They reached the central observation deck, a circular chamber dominated by a massive viewport that offered a breathtaking view of the nebula. Translucent veils of cosmic gas and dust swirled in fantastic patterns, illuminated by the light of distant stars, blue, red, and gold filaments stretching across the blackness of space. "It's beautiful," Alara breathed, momentarily distracted by the natural spectacle. "The perfect hiding place," Kieran agreed, but his attention was on the room's equipment rather than the view. "Look at this. Some of these systems are still active." He was right. Several data terminals hummed with low-level power, their displays flickering with standby patterns. Alara moved to the central console, her practiced eye scanning the interface. "This is a quantum resonance chamber," she realized, recognizing the specialized equipment used for measuring subtle variations in subspace fields, but it's been modified. She traced the unfamiliar connections leading from the main apparatus to what appeared to be a neural interface chair. Julian repurposed it, she concluded. He turned an astronomical observation tool into a consciousness mapping device, similar to what we used on Callisto, but much more powerful. Kieran examined the chair with wary respect. "So this is where he created the AI ghost we saw at the memorial?" "I think so." Alara nodded, "but not just for creating a ghost. This setup could interface directly with the quantum-locked file, allowing someone with the right neural pattern to access it without conventional decryption." She settled into the neural interface chair, adjusting the connections to fit her physiology. "The system needs to verify my pattern against whatever template Julian established." "Wait," Kieran said, catching her arm. "Are you sure this is safe? This equipment is decades old, jury-rigged by someone who, no offense to Julian, was working alone in an abandoned station." Alara met his concerned gaze. "No, I'm not sure it's safe," she admitted, "but it's the only way to access what Julian found, the only way to make his death mean something." After a moment, Kieran released her arm with a resigned nod. "Just be careful. I've gotten somewhat attached to having you around. Dr. Knox would hate to lose you to a malfunctioning neural scanner." The sentiment, delivered with his characteristic light tone but underlined with genuine concern, warmed something in Alara that had been cold since Julian's death. "I'll do my best to keep my neurons intact," she promised with a small smile. Activating the system. She felt the familiar tingle of the neural interface establishing connection. The sensation was similar to what she'd experienced on Callisto with Julian, but more intense, a deeper probing of her consciousness patterns. Behind her closed eyelids, colors swirled in patterns reminiscent of the nebula outside, neural pathways lighting up like cosmic filaments. "System is scanning," she reported, her voice distant to her own ears. "It's comparing my pattern to a stored template." For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then a series of tones indicated successful authentication, and a holographic display materialized above the central console. "It worked," Kieran breathed, moving closer to examine the data now streaming through the air. "What is all this?" Alara carefully disconnected from the interface, joining him at the console. "These are the original findings from the Forgotten Archives, the unredacted, uncensored data that Julian discovered." The holographic display showed multiple data streams, ancient neural mappings from the archives, comparative analyses of consciousness patterns across species, and most significantly, a historical record of Arcturan development that contradicted their official evolutionary narrative. "He was right," Alara said, her voice hushed with the weight of the discovery. "The Arcturans weren't the natural evolutionary pinnacle they claimed to be. They were uplifted by the ancients, genetically modified and neurologically enhanced to serve as caretakers for the archives. Just like dozens of other species, Kieran added, examining another data stream, including, apparently, humans. We were all experiments to the ancients, different approaches to consciousness development. But the Arcturans discovered this truth centuries ago. Alara continued, finding the historical records Julian had uncovered. Instead of sharing it, the early council decided to suppress the information and build their authority on a lie, claiming they were naturally superior, destined to guide lesser species like humans. And Julian threatened that narrative. Kieran concluded grimly. No wonder Vec wanted him silenced. As they continued examining the data, a secondary system activated, a message recorder keyed to Julian's neural pattern signature. His image appeared before them, more solid than the ghost at the memorial, but still obviously a recording. Alara, the image said, Julian's familiar features bringing a fresh wave of grief and determination. If you're seeing this, you've found what I discovered. The Arcturan Council has been perpetuating a myth of superiority for centuries, using it to justify their control over the sector and its resources. The truth is that humans and Arcturans are neurologically complementary, two approaches to consciousness that the ancients designed to work together, not in hierarchy. The recording continued, Julian's expression growing more intense. Vec discovered I'd accessed the original records. He offered me a place in the council's inner circle if I'd help maintain the deception. When I refused, his image flickered slightly. Well, I've taken precautions. But if you're viewing this, they weren't enough. High Judge Vec is the visible face of this conspiracy, but he's not alone. The entire upper echelon of the council is complicit. Julian's image smiled sadly. I've compiled everything into a quantum-encrypted package that can only be unlocked by a neural pattern identical to the one stored in this station, yours or mine. Once unlocked, it's programmed to transmit to every communication hub in the sector simultaneously. The truth, unfiltered and undeniable. Alara felt her breath catch. He created a dead man's switch. She realized, if anything happened to him, the truth would come out. But it didn't transmit, Kieran pointed out. Something went wrong. Julian's recording seemed to anticipate the question. The transmission requires a quantum entanglement key, a physical object that I've hidden where Vec would never think to look. Find it, activate it, and the truth will be revealed across the sector. The recording began to fade, Julian's image becoming transparent. Alara, I'm sorry to place this burden on you, but I know you'll make the right choice, whatever that may be. The key is where we first discussed the philosophy of consciousness across species, where we first realized we were mapping the same patterns from different perspectives. With those cryptic final words, the recording vanished, leaving them in the dim emergency lighting of the observation deck. Do you know where he meant? Kieran asked after a moment of silence. Alara nodded slowly, a memory surfacing. The zero-gravity garden in the Arcturan Council Palace. It was our first meeting after being formally introduced. We spent hours floating among the bioluminescent plants, discussing how different species perceive reality. She smiled faintly at the memory. Julian said it was the perfect place for revolutionary ideas, suspended between worlds, free from the constraints of conventional perspective. So the key is hidden in the most heavily guarded area of Arcturan space, Kieran summarized with a grimace. Because of course it is. Julian couldn't have chosen somewhere more convenient, like a public park or a restaurant. He chose somewhere Vec would never suspect, Alara pointed out, somewhere hidden in plain sight, within the judge's own domain. Which means, Kieran said, his expression shifting from exasperation to calculation. We need to infiltrate the Arcturan Council Palace again, because of course we do. Despite the enormity of what they'd discovered and the danger of what lay ahead, Alara found herself laughing, a genuine release of tension that felt foreign after weeks of grief and tension. "You don't have to come with me," she told him when she'd recovered. "You've already risked more than anyone could expect." Kiran regarded her with a mixture of resignation and affection, and missed the chance to break into the most secure facility in the sector. What kind of smuggler would I be? His smile faded to seriousness. "Besides, you need me. The palace security systems are legendary. You're brilliant with xenopsychology and neural science, but security override protocols are my specialty." "A match made in cosmic chaos," Alara quipped, but her gratitude was genuine. Without Kiran, she would never have made it this far. They transferred the data to secure storage devices, then prepared to leave the station. As they made their way back to the Star Dancer, Alara felt a strange mixture of emotions: grief for Julian, determination to complete his mission, and something new, a growing warmth whenever she glanced at Kiran. It wasn't a replacement for what she'd lost, but perhaps the beginning of something unexpected that the universe had placed in her path. The station's auxiliary port released the Star Dancer with a metallic groan, the old mechanisms protesting after years of disuse. As they pulled away, Alara took one last look at the abandoned facility silhouetted against the nebula's swirling colors. "Goodbye, Julian," she whispered, a final farewell to both the man and the ghost he had left behind. Beside her, Kiran plotted their course to Arcturan space, the heart of danger, the seat of power they sought to challenge, and the unlikely hiding place of the key that could change everything. "Ready for the grand finale, Dr. Knox?" he asked, his fingers hovering over the hyperdrive controls. Alara squared her shoulders, the weight of Julian's discovery settling into resolute purpose. "Ready as I'll ever be." The Star Dancer leapt into hyperspace, carrying them toward what would either be justice for Julian or their own demise at the hands of those who had silenced him. Either way, the truth would no longer remain buried in ancient archives or abandoned stations. One way or another, it would find the light. The Arcturan Council Palace hung in geosynchronous orbit above the species' homeworld, its architecture a testament to their aesthetic values. Elegant spires of polished blue-white metal, curved in geometrically precise arcs, connected by transparent walkways that seemed to float in space. From a distance, it resembled nothing so much as a crown of thorns, circling a perfect sphere, beautiful, imposing, and deliberately intimidating. "Remind me again how we're going to get inside that?" Kiran asked as they observed the palace from their hiding place within a commercial shipping vessel's cargo hold. They had booked passage as maintenance technicians, using identities Kiran had acquired through his seemingly endless network of questionable contacts. "The annual Alignment Festival begins tomorrow," Alara explained, reviewing the cultural data she'd compiled. "It commemorates the founding of the Arcturan Council and their natural ascendance as leaders of the sector." "Ironic, given what we now know," Kiran commented dryly. "Exactly. And it's one of the few times when the palace opens certain areas to diplomatic envoys and cultural representatives from across the sector." She pulled up the festival schedule on her datapad, including a ceremonial reception in the zero-gravity garden. Their plan was audacious in its simplicity. Join the maintenance crew preparing the palace for the festival, locate the quantum entanglement key in the garden, and activate it during the height of the celebrations, when the maximum number of witnesses would be present. "If Vec tries to silence us," Alara had reasoned, "he'll have to do it in front of the entire diplomatic corps. Even he wouldn't risk such a public display of force." "You're assuming he's rational," Kiran had countered. "Never underestimate what a cornered power will do when its foundation is threatened." Now, as their transport approached the palace's commercial docking ring, Those words echoed in Alara's mind. Were they walking into a trap? Had their journey across the sector been tracked despite their precautions? Too late for second thoughts, Kieran murmured, sensing her unease. Besides, your Julian went to extraordinary lengths to ensure this truth would come out. We owe it to him to see it through. He wasn't my Julian, Alara corrected automatically, though the words lacked conviction. Whatever their relationship had been, it was now defined by her role as inheritor of his dangerous discovery. The transport docked with a gentle shudder, and they joined the flow of service personnel entering the palace through the utilitarian corridors that ran behind its majestic public facades. Their forged credentials passed the initial security scans, identifying them as part of the atmospheric control team assigned to prepare the zero-gravity garden for the reception. Remember, Kieran whispered as they separated, find the key, but don't attempt to access it until I've completed the security override. We'll have approximately 3 minutes between disabling the surveillance and the backup systems engaging. The zero-gravity garden occupied a spherical chamber at the heart of the palace, a carefully cultivated ecosystem of plants from across the sector, all thriving in the absence of directional gravity. Alara entered through a service door, hanging back as other workers adjusted lighting and tended to the more delicate specimens. The garden was even more beautiful than she remembered, bioluminescent flowers pulsing with soft light, floating vines twisting in complex helices, and at the center, a spherical pool of water suspended by subtle force fields, reflecting and refracting the colors around it like a living prism. This was where she and Julian had first connected intellectually, floating among these otherworldly plants, discussing the fundamental nature of consciousness across species. It had been the beginning of both their professional collaboration and their personal relationship, though neither had recognized it at the time. Where would he have hidden the key? It needed to be somewhere meaningful to them both, yet innocuous enough not to attract attention. Her gaze was drawn to a particular specimen near the water sphere, a Terran orchid modified to survive in zero gravity, its roots extending in all directions rather than downward, adapting to an environment never intended for its species. Julian had pointed it out during their first meeting, calling it a perfect metaphor for humanity's expansion into space. As other workers moved to different sections, Alara propelled herself carefully toward the orchid. Up close, she could see that one of the roots was slightly different from the others, not organic material, but something crystalline, growing seamlessly from the plant's base. The quantum entanglement key, disguised as part of the very metaphor that had begun their journey together. Clever, Julian, she whispered, carefully examining the crystalline structure. It would be impossible to remove without damaging the plant, which meant activating it here, in the garden, during the reception. Her communicator vibrated gently against her wrist, Kieran's signal that he had reached his position in the environmental control center. Now they needed only to wait for the reception to begin, when the garden would fill with dignitaries and diplomats from across the sector, witnesses to the truth that was about to be revealed. Alara retreated to her assigned maintenance station, performing the expected tasks while keeping the orchid in her peripheral vision. Hours passed as the garden was prepared, each minute stretching her nerves tighter. Finally, palace staff began arriving to make final arrangements for the reception, setting up floating refreshment platforms and adjusting the ambient music that would accompany the event. Atmospheric stabilization complete, she reported through her communicator, using the maintenance codes they'd established. Ready for guest arrival. Confirmed, came Kieran's reply. Security protocols on standard monitoring. Estimated 19 minutes until I can initiate the override sequence. The first guests began arriving, minor officials and cultural attachés, then increasingly prominent diplomats as the reception gained momentum. Alara moved among them in her maintenance uniform, largely invisible to those who saw service personnel as part of the palace infrastructure rather than individual beings. And then, like a ripple through the gathered crowd, she sensed a shift in attention. High Judge Maros Vec had entered the garden, his copper skin burnished to a high shine for the occasion. Elaborate ceremonial robes floating around his elongated form like the tentacles of some elegant sea creature. He moved with practiced grace through the zero-gravity environment, acknowledging greetings from important guests while subtly ignoring lesser dignitaries, the very embodiment of the superiority myth he had worked so hard to protect. "Our esteemed guest has arrived," Elara murmured into her communicator, keeping her face turned away from Vec's position. "I see him," Kieran confirmed, "and he's not alone. Security detail is twice the standard protocol. They're expecting something." Elara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the garden's carefully regulated temperature. "Have we been compromised?" "Not necessarily," Kieran replied, his voice steady despite the tension. "Could be standard paranoia for a being in his position. Proceed as planned, but be ready for contingencies." The reception continued, the garden filling with conversations in a dozen languages as dignitaries floated in the weightless environment, sampling exotic refreshments and engaging in the delicate dance of interspecies politics. Elara made her way gradually toward the orchid, timing her movements to coincide with the natural flow of service personnel throughout the space. "Initiating security override now." Kieran's voice came through her communicator. "You have exactly 3 minutes before the system resets. Make it count." With practiced ease, Elara propelled herself toward the orchid, pulling a small tool from her utility belt that would appear, to casual observation, as a standard plant maintenance device. In reality, it was a quantum resonance activator designed to trigger the entanglement key without removing it from its hiding place. As she reached the plant, a voice from behind her sent ice through her veins. "An interesting specimen, is it not, Dr. Knox?" She turned slowly to find High Judge Vec floating mere meters away, his faceted eyes regarding her with cold intelligence. Gone was the diplomatic mask, replaced by the calculating gaze of a predator who had finally cornered elusive prey. "One of my favorites," Vec continued conversationally, "a Terran orchid, modified to thrive where its evolutionary path never intended, much like humanity itself, adaptable, but ultimately out of its natural environment." Elara forced herself to remain outwardly calm, though her pulse hammered in her ears. "A testament to resilience, High Judge, the capacity to find new ways to flourish, even when transplanted to alien soil." "Is that what you believe you're doing here?" Vec asked, his harmonics shifting to a subtly threatening register. "Flourishing. I would suggest floundering might be more accurate, or perhaps trespassing." Around them, the reception continued, guests unaware of the deadly conversation taking place at the garden's edge. Elara was acutely conscious of the seconds ticking away. Kieran's security override would not last much longer. "Julian Reeves believed in the potential for true partnership between our species," she said, deciding that boldness was her only remaining option. "Not the false hierarchy your council has perpetuated for centuries." Vec's copper skin darkened slightly, the Arcturan equivalent of a dangerous smile. "Ah, so we dispense with pretense. Good. It grows tiresome." He gestured subtly, and Elara noticed security personnel beginning to move into position around the garden's perimeter. "Julian Reeves was an idealist," Vec continued, "as I suspect are you. But idealism without pragmatism is merely self-indulgence. The truth he discovered that you now carry would destabilize the entire sector if revealed without context." "You mean without the Council's filters and distortions?" Elara countered, her hand still gripping the activation device. without the lies that maintain your power. Vec sighed, a multi-toned sound that expressed both regret and determination. Power structures exist for a reason. Dr. Knox, they provide stability, order, progress. Yes, the Arcturan narrative is enhanced, but it serves a greater purpose than mere truth ever could. That's not your decision to make, Alara said, her voice gaining strength. Not for humans, not for any species manipulated by your council's mythology. A fascinating ethical position, Vec replied, and one we might debate at length under different circumstances. His tone hardened. But at this moment, you have precisely 5 seconds to surrender the activation device before my security team removes you from this reception permanently. Alara met his gaze unflinchingly. Even the universe knows, Judge Vec, that some truths cannot remain buried forever. With a swift motion, she pressed the activator against the crystalline root embedded in the orchid. The device hummed, establishing quantum resonance with the entanglement key. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the garden's ambient lighting flickered, and every communication device in the chamber, from personal communicators to the palace's official broadcast system, activated simultaneously. Julian's voice echoed through the space, startling the assembled dignitaries. Attention all sentient beings of the Arcturus sector, the message began. What follows is the unaltered truth about our shared history, a truth the Arcturan Council has suppressed for centuries. Vec's composure shattered, his face darkening to deep bronze as he signaled frantically to his security forces. Shut it down, all communications immediately. But it was too late. Throughout the garden, holographic displays materialized, showing the data Julian had discovered in the Forgotten Archives, irrefutable evidence that humans and Arcturans shared a common origin as subjects of the ancients' evolutionary experiments. We were never meant to exist in hierarchy, Julian's recorded voice continued. The ancients designed our consciousness patterns to be complementary, different approaches to the same universal awareness. The Council's claims of natural superiority are a deliberate fabrication, maintained to preserve a power structure that benefits the few at the expense of the many. Chaos erupted in the garden as dignitaries reacted to the revelations, some with shock, others with outrage, and a surprising number with what appeared to be knowing resignation. The truth, it seemed, had been suspected by many, but never before proven so conclusively. In the confusion, Alara felt herself grabbed roughly from behind, Vec's security forces making their move. But before they could drag her away, another commotion drew their attention. Kieran had entered the garden, accompanied by an Arcturan Alara recognized from Julian's research files, Dr. Soyan Tayel, the chief archivist of the Forgotten Archives. The evidence is authentic, Tayel announced, his voice carrying the weight of academic authority. I have verified the quantum signatures myself. These are the original, unaltered records from our ancestral archives. Vec's security forces hesitated, uncertain how to proceed in the face of this new development. The High Judge himself seemed momentarily frozen, his calculating mind visibly reassessing the rapidly deteriorating situation. Taking advantage of the confusion, Kieran pushed through the crowd toward Alara. Time to go, he urged, grabbing her arm. The palace security grid is reactivating, and they've locked down all standard exits. But the transmission, Alara began, unwilling to leave before confirming the message had spread beyond the palace. Is broadcasting across the entire sector, Kieran assured her. Julian's quantum entanglement network bypassed all council communications protocols. They can't stop it now. They began moving toward an emergency access point Kieran had identified in his preparations, but their path was suddenly blocked by High Judge Vec himself. His composure partially restored, but his copper skin still darkened with rage. You have destroyed centuries of careful governance, he said. his voice vibrating with barely controlled fury. Unleashed chaos where there was order. This is the human legacy, disruption without understanding the consequences. The consequences of truth, Alara challenged, or the consequences of your lies finally being exposed. Vex's hand moved to a device at his waist, not a weapon. Alara realized with alarm, but something potentially more dangerous. A neural manipulator, prohibited technology that could directly interface with and override conscious thought. Some minds are too limited to comprehend the necessity of structure, Vex said, activating the device. A subtle field extended from it, and Alara felt an immediate pressure in her mind, foreign thoughts attempting to override her own, suggesting surrender, compliance, acceptance of Vex's authority. Beside her, Kieran staggered, clearly fighting the same mental intrusion, but Alara had spent years studying consciousness patterns, including techniques to recognize and resist external influence. She focused on the neural mapping exercises she had practiced with Julian, establishing boundaries within her own consciousness. "Your device won't work on me," she managed to say, each word a struggle against the invasive field. "Julian and I mapped our neural defenses together." Vex's expression shifted from confidence to uncertainty as his manipulation failed to take hold. He increased the device's power, the mental pressure intensifying until Alara felt blood trickling from her nose with the strain of resistance. Just when she thought she might collapse, another presence seemed to join her consciousness, a familiar pattern, fragmentary but unmistakable. Julian's AI ghost, or something like it, preserved within the quantum entanglement network, reinforcing her mental defenses. "Impossible," Vec whispered, seeing the change in her eyes. "No human mind can resist at this level." "Not alone," Alara agreed, feeling Julian's presence supporting her. "But we're never truly alone. That's what you never understood about consciousness. Judge Vec, it's not isolated within individuals. It's connected across all sentient beings. The ancients knew this. It's why they created us as complementary patterns, not competitors." With renewed strength, she pushed back against the neural manipulation, turning Vec's own technology against him. The High Judge's faceted eyes widened in shock as he felt his own consciousness being invaded, his carefully constructed mental barriers beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, Kieran had recovered enough to act. With quick precision, he accessed the emergency controls for the garden's gravity systems. "Hold on to something," he warned Alara, then activated the override. The zero-gravity environment collapsed instantly, artificial gravity asserting itself at double the standard rate. Everyone in the garden plummeted toward what was now definitively down. Dignitaries, security forces, and High Judge Vec himself, the neural manipulator falling from his grasp as he struggled to orient himself in the suddenly directional space. In the confusion, Kieran pulled Alara toward the emergency exit. "The Star Dancers waiting at external docking port 9, he told her. Automated protocols engaged as soon as the transmission started. They fled through maintenance corridors as alarms blared throughout the palace. Behind them, the revelation continued to spread across communication networks throughout the sector. The truth Julian had died protecting, now impossible to contain or suppress. "Will it be enough?" Alara asked as they ran. "Will the truth actually change anything?" "Truth alone? Maybe not," Kieran admitted, "but truth witnessed by every major diplomatic representative in the sector, backed by irrefutable evidence and the testimony of the Arcturan's own chief archivist, that's a different matter entirely." They reached the docking port where the Star Dancer waited, its engines already warmed for immediate departure. As they boarded, Alara cast one last look at the Arcturan palace, the seat of power that had seemed so invulnerable just hours before, now thrown into chaos by nothing more complicated than the truth. The Star Dancer detached from the docking clamps and accelerated away from the palace, narrowly avoiding the security vessels scrambling to intercept unauthorized departures. Kieran's piloting skills proved themselves once again as he navigated through the defensive grid, pushing the ship to its limits until they broke free into open space. "Where to now?" he asked, once they'd established a safe distance. "We're officially the most wanted beings in Arcturan space, probably in several adjacent sectors as well." Alara considered the question. With Julian's mission completed, she felt both fulfillment and a strange emptiness. The driving purpose that had sustained her through grief and danger now suddenly resolved. "The truth is out," she said slowly, "but that's just the beginning. There will be resistance, denial, attempts to discredit the evidence or minimize its significance. The Council won't surrender power easily, even with their foundational myth exposed. So we keep fighting," Kieran concluded, "setting course for the outer territories. Continue Julian's work. Ensure the truth takes root." "We?" Alara asked, raising an eyebrow. "I thought smugglers preferred to avoid political entanglements." Kieran's usual carefree expression softened into something more genuine. "Let's just say my priorities have evolved recently. Besides," he added with a hint of his characteristic grin, "overthrowing corrupt galactic powers is good for business. Opens up all sorts of new transportation opportunities without those pesky trade restrictions." Alara laughed, a real laugh. Perhaps her first since Julian's death. It felt strange but necessary. Like the first breath after too long underwater, she realized that while she would always carry Julian's memory and continue his work, she had also found something unexpected in Kieran Vale. Not a replacement, but a new beginning. As the Star Dancer accelerated toward the hyperspace jump point, the Arcturan homeworld receded behind them, a blue-white jewel cut against the vastness of space. Somewhere on that world, and throughout the sector, beings of all species were confronting a new reality, one where the hierarchies and divisions they had accepted as natural were revealed as artificial constructs, imposed by those who benefited from separation rather than unity. The path forward would not be easy. Power structures centuries in the making would not dissolve overnight, and those who had profited from the old order would fight to preserve their advantages. But the first crucial step had been taken. The truth was free, spreading across consciousness like ripples in a cosmic pond. Alara felt Julian's presence fading from her mind, not vanishing completely, but settling into memory rather than active consciousness. The quantum ghost had served its purpose, just as he had hoped it would. Now it was time for the living to continue the work. "Even the universe knows," she murmured, watching the stars blur as they prepared to jump to hyperspace, "that the truth will find its way into the light." Beside her, Kieran reached across the console, his hand finding hers in a gesture that was both comfort and promise. "To new horizons, Dr. Knox," he said softly. "To new horizons," she agreed, turning her gaze forward as the Star Dancer leapt into the unknown. The small observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Harmony afforded a perfect view of the proceedings taking place on the newly constructed orbital platform. 6 months had passed since the revelation in the Arcturan Council Palace. 6 months of upheaval, negotiation, and gradual transformation across the Arcturus sector. "They're calling it the Convergence Accord," said Dr. Soyan Tael, the Arcturan archivist who had become one of the most respected voices in the transition. "The first truly equal partnership between humans and Arcturans in our shared history." Alara nodded, watching as representatives from both species signed the historic agreement below. "And the Council?" "Reformed," Tael replied, his copper skin brightening with cautious optimism, the Arcturan expression of hope. no longer structured by species hierarchy, but by expertise and democratic selection. Judge Vec and his closest allies have been removed from power, though many are still awaiting formal trial. And the neural archives? Alara asked, thinking of the ancient knowledge that had started their journey. Open to qualified researchers from all species, Tyel confirmed, under ethical guidelines developed jointly by human and Arcturan scientists. Your contribution to those guidelines has been invaluable. Dr. Knox. In the months following the revelation, Alara had emerged as a key figure in the transition, her background in xenopsychology making her uniquely qualified to help navigate the profound cultural adjustments required on both sides. The revelation that both species shared complementary consciousness patterns had initially created shock and denial, but gradually gave way to curiosity and tentative cooperation. None of this would have happened without Julian, she said quietly. His sacrifice made all of this possible. And without you to carry his discovery forward, Tyel added gently. Courage takes many forms. Dr. Knox, his was to preserve the truth at the cost of his life. Yours was to live for that truth, even when the easier path would have been to accept the official narrative and move on. Movement at the entrance to the observation deck drew their attention. Kieran Vale entered, dressed in formal attire that still somehow managed to look slightly rakish on his lanky frame. The past months had seen an unlikely transformation in his status as well, from fugitive smuggler to respected independent diplomatic liaison, a position created specifically to utilize his unique combination of skills and connections. The signing ceremony is complete, he announced. The Convergence Accord is officially in effect throughout the sector. He grinned, unable to contain his satisfaction. And I've just received word that the trade route restrictions through the boundary territories have been lifted. Seems someone finally realized that artificial barriers between complementary systems aren't particularly productive. How economically convenient for a certain former smuggler, Alara teased, though her smile was warm. Former, I prefer evolved, Kieran corrected, moving to stand beside her at the viewport, much like our interspecies relations. Below them, the signing ceremony had given way to a more informal reception, humans and Arcturans mingling with new awareness of their shared heritage. There were still tensions, still centuries of ingrained biases to overcome, but the foundation for genuine partnership had been laid. Will you be returning to academic research now that the transition is stabilizing? Tyel inquired, respectfully excusing himself as a diplomatic aide requested his presence below. Alara considered the question after the archivist had departed. Her position at the Xenopsychology Institute remained open, her colleagues eager for her return and the insights she had gained through her extraordinary experiences. Eventually, she decided, but there's still work to be done here. The theoretical understanding of consciousness patterns across species has practical applications for this new partnership. Julian's research was just the beginning. Speaking of new beginnings, Kieran said, a hint of uncharacteristic hesitation in his voice. The Star Dancer's been upgraded with the latest survey equipment, perfect for mapping the consciousness patterns Julian was studying in other regions beyond Arcturan space. Alara turned to face him fully, noting the careful casualness with which he avoided meeting her eyes directly. Are you proposing a research expedition, Captain Vale? More of a continuing collaboration, he replied, finally looking at her with the directness that had first caught her attention months ago at Julian's memorial, the kind that doesn't necessarily have a fixed endpoint or predetermined conclusion. Something warm unfurled in Alara's chest, not erasing the grief that would always be part of her, but existing alongside it, growing into its own space in her heart. Julian would always be part of her story, part of what had shaped her into the person she had become. But Kiran, unexpected, irreverent, surprisingly principled Kiran had become part of her future. "I think," she said carefully, "that sounds like exactly the kind of journey worth taking." His smile in response was unlike any she'd seen from him before, not the practiced charm or the strategic grin, but something genuine and a little vulnerable. He offered his hand, and when she took it, the contact felt like coming home to a place she hadn't known she was seeking. Beyond the viewport, the stars of the Arcturus sector shone with constant light, unchanged by the political transformations taking place among the tiny species that observed them. Yet Alara couldn't help feeling that even those ancient stellar furnaces somehow approved of what had transpired, truth emerging from darkness, artificial barriers falling away, consciousness recognizing itself across the boundaries of evolution and experience. Even the universe knows, she thought, not for the first time, that some connections transcend the divisions we imagine between us. Together, they turned their gaze outward, toward the stars that had witnessed countless civilizations rise and fall, countless truths discovered and forgotten and rediscovered again. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with both promise and challenge, but for the first time since Julian's death, Alara felt ready to embrace that uncertainty, to step forward into the unknown with both the wisdom of the past and the hope of the future as her guides. The cosmos stretched before them, vast and mysterious and waiting to be explored, not alone but together, as perhaps it had always been meant to be.